Well, there's been much public reaction to South African Reserve Bank's announcement yesterday on its Phala Phala findings. Now, the SARB says that it cannot come to the conclusion that President Cyril Ramaphosa violated exchange controls in the Phala Phala matter. The institution will not make the report public due to what it says are legislative requirements and constraints, but it has explained how it reached that conclusion, at least briefly so. Now, according to SARB, its Financial Surveillance Department, FinSurv, conducted the investigation in two phases. The process involved internal information and databases and the analysis of cross-border foreign exchange transactions over the period under investigation. Also, documents and interviews with various individuals were conducted. Redge Nkosi is an executive director and head of research for money, banking and macroeconomics at Firstsource Money. Redge, thanks for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thanks, Sakina. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm very interested to know your first view on the SARB statement and what they concluded.
Well, firstly, I think it's a whitewash. It's absolutely unprecedented that we have such a statement from the Reserve Bank. Remember, it's only one-liner which says that they find the president, they absolve the president basically for what we were trying to know about where the money came from. And they say, well, so they're not going to reveal the details of that. We find that very, very distasteful for the country indeed. The question here, Sakina, is what was the money for? Who brought the money in? Not whether the transaction was perfected or not. I think we're being taken for a ride by the Reserve Bank. Unfortunately, it doesn't surprise me at all in that regard.
So why doesn't it surprise you, Redge?
Well, the Reserve Bank, in my view, has not been fair to the country in its conduct of monetary policy for quite a long time indeed, and is in fact is responsible for much of the mess that we find ourselves in here. And today we see them, playing a political game, which game it's not in the interest of South Africa as a country. They should be telling us that there was money, which we know there was money, and they should be telling us who brought the money in, how it was brought in, and why the president has such type of monies in his possession for such long periods of time without having the money declared by, to the authorities, that we know are responsible for that. The Reserve Bank cannot just issue a liner. It has the 2 pages of nothing, and with a liner absorbing the president. Frankly, that's not good enough.
So for the layfolk among us, self-included, when SARB says that the transaction wasn't perfected because the Sudanese businessman Hazim Mustafa didn't collect the buffalo. So is that, if you would perhaps just start by explaining that to us and what this perfection or perfecting of the transaction would actually mean and how this has helped them in coming to the sort of conclusion that they did in terms of interrogating the circumstances and reaching that conclusion.
Well, perfecting a transaction is actually about the contractual terms between the president and the party who was involved. In other words, the Reserve Bank is saying there was no contractual arrangement or the contractual terms were not complete. Therefore, they cannot arrive at a conclusion. But the country is not interested in those contractual issues. We're interested in the monies that appeared at the president's house. All right? Whether the contract was concluded or not, the idea is not about the contract. The idea is about whether the monies in possession, by the president, were legal or not. So telling us about whether the transaction was perfected is a side issue. And I think they're trying to, really sidestep the matter, the real issue of the president having to have his monies stashed, or these monies, foreign monies stashed in his house.
The other question that I can't help but think of, Reg, is where is that money now? Do we know?
Sakina, I'm afraid we do not know exactly where that money. By the way, We were told it's about $580 million and $580,000. But, we know spy boss Fraser said that's about $4 million. We do not know who is correct. And this is what we're supposed to be told by the Reserve Bank, at least if they examined all the records. Even SARS itself wasn't particularly clear. They're talking of the president complying with tax issues. We're not about compliance here. We're talking about the monies that were received. So I think there is a political game being played in the country, and the Reserve Bank is going along with that political game when, in fact, they claim to be independent of politics.
But what would the Reserve Bank stand to gain by playing politics in this instance?
It's everyone's guess, Sakina. This is a high-level case, as you know. It involves the head of state, who is above all of us. And frankly, he's the boss of the Reserve Bank, by the way. The ANC and the president are the boss of the Reserve Bank. And, it is also possible, and we know it is very possible, that all players in these games are accountable to the president in some way, and therefore they're trying to shield him. I'm not sure what it benefits the country. They may shield the president, but quite frankly, it's not in the national interest. And this is what really is putting us, most of us, quite much, if you want, putting us off. They shouldn't be protecting the president. They should be protecting the national interest. The Reserve Bank has not been in the business of protecting national interest, as we've come to see. So yes, here we are with an obfuscation by the Reserve Bank in a liner, which I think is going to be challenged by those who may wish to challenge the Reserve Bank.
So, Redge, you say they're obfuscating. The Reserve Bank says that the reason for keeping the report private, among other things, is due to legislative requirements. Which legislative requirements or constraints might those be that would not allow them to share the details of that particular report with the broader public?
There may as well be many regulatory issues related to that the Reserve Bank knows. But this is an issue of high public interest, to the extent that, just as SARS did, the president was able to allow the SARS to issue out statements that should not have been issued. And the president should actually issue, or if he says command or ask the Reserve Bank to tell us all the issues, all the legislative requirements, and take them off and tell us the truth as to what this happened. This is a high-profile case. We cannot be told that this is, the issues of legislative nature that are going to hold the Reserve Bank from telling us the truth. There may as well be, some of which we may not really know. But look, this is an exchange control matter. Very easy to tell us, look, money came in, money didn't come in. It just doesn't augur well for the country to be told that some legislative requirements that, prohibit us from having to be open about the issue.
Always seems, very curious when simple questions become very complicated in terms of answering, because money definitely came in. There seems to be no dispute around that. What happened to the money? Who does the money belong to? Where is the money? All of those questions seem to be lingering at this point. But just very briefly, Redge, we're out of time, but very briefly, what does this mean to ordinary South Africans? Does this mean that now, in the instance that I'm sitting with foreign currency, I don't have to declare it, if the transaction is not perfected, I can just keep the money and nobody should ask me any questions about it?
If you did that, Sakina, you'll be in jail right away. All right? If you didn't declare that money for a day or two, or at least 30 days, you'll be in jail. I think the credibility of the Reserve Bank, which has never been there anyway, right from the start, is actually under severe strain. Remember, the Reserve Bank is at the center of the mess, the economic mess that we find ourselves in here. Now, this is sinking us further and further. And the president himself has to come out and say, look, this is the issue around this money. And the Reserve Bank must, as a matter of urgency, reconsider this statement and give us a full account as to what happened and why it took so long. Remember, the Reserve Bank has so many ways in which to determine the money is coming in and not coming in and out of the country. They cannot tell us they've taken 1 year to solve this very easy issue.
No.
Anyhow, whatever the case it is that is there, the Reserve Bank has so many questions to answer. And unfortunately, the credibility of the Reserve Bank has sunk even lower. It has no credibility after all, Sakina.
Well, story for another day. We'll hopefully get into that. But for now, thanks so much, Redge Nkosi, Executive Director and Head of Research for Money, Banking and Macroeconomics at Firstsource Money, discussing the Reserve Bank's findings on the Phala Phala investigation.